A short story by Paul McCann entitled Life's Little Sparkles. Jane always wanted to be a dancer but faced an uphill battle after getting kicked out of home by her parents who couldn't cope with Jane's angry tantrums. The constant arguments had started over the drugs that she was taking and the company she was keeping. At 14, Jane was thrown out into the cold, where the streets are a cold and a merciless place. She danced on the pavements for passers-by, who often felt intimidated by her street performances. There's no doubt that she had a talent, but audience of the street theatre scene did not welcome live entertainment as they walked along city sidewalks, to jobs and to businesses. Jane lost sight of what was real, and then the battle with mental illness began. The drugs she had been taking to make her feel good were no fun anymore. The friends she knew had all done the dirt and also abandoned her to her suffering and hurt. It was hard to be a stranger in a crowd where nobody ever hears the things you have to say. It's even harder to have people verbally abuse you when you're dancing at dawn to the chorus of life as it passes you by. On the day the ambulance arrived, Jane could hear someone call her name out loud. "Jane, can you hear me?" The paramedic squeezed her earlobe and continued to shout. "Jane, can you hear me? Nod if you can." Jane nodded, and then she squinted through her blurry vision and saw her dad standing there in his ambo uniform. With the help of another paramedic, they lifted Jane and placed her in the ambulance. Next thing Jane knew, she was in a hospital bed with 11 other people in a rundown clinic known as Purdy House. The other patients were mainly young people who were at their wits' end, either all the product of drug addiction or alcoholism. For the first week, Jane was tagged and jagged before her family were able to visit. The first time her mother came to the bedside, she looked at Jane, who lay there heavily sedated, and said, "So this is the future you want?" Jane was unable to respond. Her mother continued, "I warned you, but you wouldn't listen. Well, maybe now you'll listen. You'll never be a dancer, you'll never be a daughter, you'll never be a mother. You'll never be anything unless you get off whatever it is that put you here." With that, her mother got up and left the hospital ward. "Bitch," said the girl in the bed beside Jane. Jane was too weak to speak as the girl beside went and sat down beside Jane. She was too far gone, even to know who had just spoken to her. As the girl sat on Jane's bed, she said, "My name's Louise. Aye, don't worry, it'll be okay." Jane briefly opened her eyes, and a kind nod, recognition of who was there as she fell asleep. Each day, Jane had a visit from the mental health team, and her mother and father also visited each evening. Jane was now able to recognise her parents and even talk to them about things. The first time Jane self-harmed in the hospital shower, she had to undergo minor surgery, and after that episode she was placed on suicide watch, and visits from her parents ceased for a few weeks. With her slow progress, Jane was now doing schoolwork in the hospital, and eventually was taken off suicide watch. Jane was permitted to walk around the hospital grounds, and one day she found a door to the basement, and there was a little room that was used for storing beds and other old furniture items. There was a small window near the ceiling that permitted a shaft of sunlight to come through and land like a spotlight upon the dusty floor. That was the first moment for a long time Jane had the desire to dance. She started to move some of the furniture away to the side of the room, and she cleared a spot where she could move. Then she stood there in the light of the sun as she started to slowly twirl. Then gracefully like a swan, she glided across the floor as if it were a lake. She jumped and lifted her arms, and then a young man appeared at the door. He applauded and cheered. "I've never seen anything like that, as beautiful in my life. Who are you? What are you doing at a place like this? You should be on a stage or in a movie." Jane had never had appreciation before, and it wasn't easy to accept. She was about to run away out of the room in fear, but then she noticed the silver cross on the young man's collar and realised he was a priest. She stopped near the door and looked into his eyes, and for the first time in months, she spoke. "Thank you, Father." He looked at her and said, "Don't call me Father. My name is Ken." "Thank you, Ken." "Don't thank me. I want to thank you. You're someone who has brought me some hope and inspiration. What I want you to think about is maybe teaching young people from the ghetto how to dance, how to hold their head up again. Would you please consider coming over to my church hall next week? I can guarantee you at least 6 people who would really benefit from your talent." He had never had to ask twice. Jane was eager to do it. "Sure, Ken, but you'll have to ask Dr. Phil. I'm in Ward 3 and I'm not sure when they're letting me out." The priest looked and gently smiled, and he said, "I'm here to say Mass for some of the patients and their families. Would you like to join us at the service today?" Jane replied, "Sure, Ken. I haven't been to Mass since I was in primary school." Ken walked across the room and lifted a small wooden pulpit stand. As he lifted it, he looked at Jane and said, "Today I have been blessed. What is your name?" "My name is Jane." Ken lifted his hands in the air and he said, "Thank you, Lord, for Jane. You have given her a gift that speaks when she dances." Jane shed a few tears as she wiped them away from Ken and turned her back. Ken approached, turned her around and said, "Jane, I want you to dance at the service this morning for the people. Would you do us that honour?" Jane's face lit up. No one had ever shown any interest in her talent before, and for the first time in her life she felt good about dancing and who she was. Then she said in a confident tone, "I would love to dance at the church service, Ken. Will there be some music there for me to dance to?" Ken replied, "I've brought a CD player with some reflective kind of music that I'm sure you could translate into movement." Jane responded, "Sure, no problem. I translate a dance for your congregation, Ken, if you get permission from the head doctor so that I can dance and help the ghetto kids." "That's fantastic. Leave it with me, Jane, and I'll speak with the hospital doctors today and let you know." Jane and Ken made their way from the basement to the little chapel in the grounds of the hospital. Inside the chapel, a few people had already taken their seats. Ken placed the wooden pulpit beside the small altar in front of the church. As he went to put on his garments, he pointed to a cupboard at the back of the chapel, and he said to Jane, "There are some white robes on the top shelf there. You can put one of those over your pyjamas if you like, and I'll place a chair on the altar beside me. Join me when you're ready." From his mobile phone, Ken rang the doctor in charge and informed him where Jane was, just to cover himself. And also Jane, and his fate would have it Jane's mum and dad were there waiting to see her. And so the doctor informed them where she was and what was she doing. the beginning of Mass, Jane took her seat beside the altar. Halfway through the service, Ken announced there would be a special moment and introduced Jane. Then after he put the CD on, he took a seat. That moment, Jane's mum and dad walked in through the door of the chapel and sat down at the back of the chapel. A beam of sunlight shone in through the windows of the little chapel, and all the people in the pews sat back and watched as Jane began to dance. It was a beautiful moment of praise and worship for everyone, and when the music stopped, Jane fell to the floor. She had given everything she could and was totally exhausted. Everyone in the chapel applauded, and Jane slowly got up off the floor. As she did, her mum and dad walked up the centre aisle towards her, and as they met, they looked at each other, and tears began to fall. A few kisses and hugs followed, and when things settled, the Mass continued. The impact of Jane's dance had driven home to her parents just how talented their daughter really was. Then after the service was over, Jane introduced Ken to her mum and dad and told them all about going to teach some dance form to the local youth. Her parents were impressed, and for the first time in her life, Jane felt like she was really proud to be who she was. The days in the clinic were now much happier for Jane, and she was able to speak more with the other residents and the staff, who noticed a huge improvement in her. Jane couldn't wait to meet the street kids, and when the day came, Ken picked her up and brought her to the hall, where 6 young adults were waiting. At this point, names weren't important, so Jane called her students Laurie, Barry and Harry, and Nona, Lona and Mona. She tagged herself Sparkles, and she clicked with them immediately. Jane knew all the street smart lingo, but one thing more really topped it off. Jane had a big favour to ask Ken. Instead of using the hall, she requested that they go down to the beach for the first dance instruction. All the street kids were also grateful, as some of them had never been out of the ghetto before, so to get to the beach was just brilliant. Ken agreed. After packing a few things into the church bus, everyone piled in and off they went. When they arrived at the beach, they all sat on the rocks looking out to sea. Jane found a flat area and put on some cool techno music on the CD player, and then she urged everyone to stand around in a circle around her. "Okay, everyone, now just do as I do." "Everyone, watch. Now start rowing the boat." They followed Jane's movements. "Now, throw a fishing line into the water." They did as she asked, and then the dance began. She made it up as she went, and introduced movement with theatre attached. They followed her as she jumped into the air and lifted her arms. Soon they were all out of breath and laughing. After a few moments, Jane put on another CD. This music was peaceful and quiet. Jane introduced them to ballet. There was an enthusiasm on their faces. Ken was watching from a distance and was quietly very excited about what he saw.
"Can you teach us how to do those steps, Sparkles?"
said Mona.
"Yeah, like it's so cool,"
said Laurie.
"It'll take time, but if you have time to spare, I can make you all ballerinas."
They all laughed.
"How long will it take, Sparkles?"
Barry asked.
"It depends on you,"
said Jane, and she continued.
"What if we do a show for the local community, a kind of mixed bag with a little ballroom and jazz top, maybe some ballet with some modern steps? It could be a big hit, and we would all be the talk of the town."
They were all eager to give it their best. Once Ken heard about the plan, he was more than happy to help in any way that he could to provide funds, equipment, or whatever was necessary. And at that moment in time, Sparkles Dance Company had been found. The next 6 months were very busy for everyone. Jane was discharged from the hospital within a week, and her overall health was in good order. With the help of the government and the church, she was located into a small area around the church and allocated a small budget to get the dance company up and running. Each week that passed, new people wanted to join the group. It was more than Ken had expected. And within a year, Sparkles Dance Company was ready to put on their show. It was the opening night of the local commotion, and the media were out in force, as was all the who's who of the community. It was the proudest moment of Jane's life to see her mum and dad telling everyone about their daughter, who was the person who made this special event happen. The show was a huge success, and the Sparkles Theatre Company took it on the road with sell-out shows wherever it went. The end.